welcome to a Stand Up with Pete Dominic, a special episode where I am taking a departure from the regular format of The Daily Show and bringing you episode 2 of my Gen Zeries. That's right, Gen Z series, where I will get to know a young person, interview them here on the podcast, and we can all keep track of their progress and learn from the conversation so as to better relate to people of that generation, including if you have kids or family members of that age, and to try to advocate for them and their interests and just better know what they're dealing with in the world that we are leaving them and that they are inheriting. It's the Gen Zeries, folks. On the first episode of this series, we spoke to the very impressive young Lucy Solomon, who is a sophomore at Marquette University in Washington, D.C. A great conversation, learned so much from her. Very thought-provoking, intimate, honest, and vulnerable conversation that you can go back and listen to if you'd like. Today, our guest is a young woman named Hope Moses, who is a junior at Marquette University. If some of my high school friends are listening, no, not that Hope Moses. Yeah, it's a unique name, but there are at least two. And I'm very excited to introduce this Hope Moses to you. She comes highly recommended from Odessa Sun, our intern here on Stand Up. They were classmates at Marquette University before Odessa transferred. Hope is a third-year journalism student at the Diederich College of Communication. She's experienced with leadership and administrative duties, dedicated to fostering a supportive environment that encourages creativity and promotes kindness. She's already won all kinds of awards and scholarships. Her work has been featured in all different kinds of publications. She's currently the editor of diversity and inclusion at the school newspaper, the prestigious Marquette Wire. She's also a member of the Marquette Mentors program. She is a criminal justice intern at the Community Newsletter, a widely read publication in the Wisconsin prison system. She's the inaugural Foley Fellow of the James W. Foley Legacy Foundation. She's also a resident assistant at Marquette University, a tennis player, a peer counselor, and so much more. She is so impressive. There's so much that she's already accomplished at the young age of 21, and I was really excited to get to know her a little bit and have the opportunity to talk to her, and I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. I hope you enjoy this effort. If you've got a young person that you think I should talk to, I would love to consider them. Send them my way. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Hope told me to definitely try to connect with her on LinkedIn and everything else. You can find that on the show notes for today's episode. It's Generation Z, and my guest today is Hope Moses at Marquette University, whose future is very promising. All right, here she is. We're so excited to learn more about Hope Moses. Welcome to the conversation. So happy to have you here at our Gen Z series.
Your Gen Zeries, is that what it's called?
I misspoke right away, and you nailed me. You are a great journalist already.
Well, it actually kind of sounds pretty cool, though. A Gen Zeries.
The Gen Z series, Gen Zeries. Do I have to pay you for that if I use it?
You do. I'm serious, too. I need my college paper.
Yes, you are good already. Well, thanks for talking to us. Goodbye. We've already been impressed. It's been great. So I just told everybody about you, and it does, you have done a tremendous amount at a young age. You're involved in so many different things. And I guess my first question is you seem like a really ambitious, passionate person about a lot of things. How would you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as ambitious as well. I'm a big community person, so I feel like all the things I've done in my resume, this one time I was with my advisor, and I was like, when someone looks at my resume, they're probably like, what is this? None of it really matches. I worked at an art gallery last semester while also in a mentorship program and doing work at the newsroom and stuff. But that being said, she was the one thing it all has in common is community. And you can tell that's really important to you. So I think that's how I would describe myself. I'm very ambitious person, always looking to give back to my community, especially communities that have given so much to me. So I just hardworking. I get that from my family. So
that's awesome. I like that answer. Community is the thread that ties it all together. But are you now? It says your resume implies that you don't sleep. You were a resident assistant. I was a resident assistant. I don't want to brag. I used it to blackmail students, generally speaking. I know you guys are drinking in there. and you're going to have to give me some or I'm going to write you up kind of thing. I was corrupt. How was that experience for you?
Sorry, I just have to laugh because that was such like a serious like answer. You're like, I was corrupt. Yeah.
I was a corrupt RA.
Well, I think the first part about that is self-awareness. So I'm glad that you were self-aware in that way. For me, I feel like I'm a pretty chill RA. Like, unless it's like right in front of me, like I'm not searching for it. I'm not, trying to purposely get students in trouble. I work in a dorm right now with like athletes, especially. So like I take that into account. Like, I don't want to get you in trouble, but just be responsible. Yeah, we've been having some weird situations. So it's always a interesting job. I'm sure you had some interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you can get really deeply involved. And I mean, I guess the most serious thing I got involved in when I was an RA was 1,000 years ago. But like a guy was beating up his girlfriend, and like me and others had to like stop that. And then we had to be witnesses in it and like the aftermath of it and so on, because so there could be violence, there could be drugs, there can obviously be, I think most commonly, unfortunately, sexual assault stuff. I mean, and as an RA, you learn a lot about those issues. And as a journalist, I mean, you've written about a lot of those issues. But I guess I'm assuming that you're getting, unfortunately, some firsthand experience with some of the bad stuff about, speaking of which, community, dorm living, young people, alcohol, all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you said, from both sides of it, from being an RA and being a journalist on campus, you see a lot of that. Like we had a situation a few weeks ago where this guy called the cops on his girlfriend for abuse, and it was and it wasn't. Like there was like this whole thing going on, and so the person apparently ran into the building, and so I was on duty at the time, so I had to like go on this like wild goose chase, like trying to find them and call the police. It was just a whole thing, and it turned out well. The police on campus, they're really like sensitive to issues like that, but it's stuff like that where it's like you hear about it, it happens on college campuses, but RAs are definitely in some ways like on the front lines of handling the issue, not the issue itself. But no,
I think it's a really important experience to have. I'm glad that you're having that. And I'm sure you're a lot more ethical than I was. So tell me about young Hope Moses. You grew up in the city of Milwaukee?
Yes, I grew up in the city of Milwaukee, like northwest side. And I was just always the same person that I am now. I just tried everything. I think I played like 6-7 sports. Not for a long term, but like the only sport I played for like long term was like basketball and tennis. But I was always trying new things. I was really shy. I didn't really speak much for the first few years of my life. So being a journalist, like everyone in my family is like, that's so funny because you spend your time talking to people and just talking in general.
Well, certainly. I mean, we talked for a while, as I said earlier, Aaron, to folks in a pre-interview, and talking to you now. That's surprising to me that you were, but probably for different reasons anyway. Yeah,
I didn't. I had a lot of social anxiety. And so my mom, she said this a few like months ago. She was like, most parents just want their kids to be quiet. And she was like, I just wanted you to say something. She was like, you were just always like so quiet. But I was a big reader. I was a big writer. My family's just so cool. So I come from a family of like writers. And when I say that, I mean, my uncle, he built like a studio in his house, just like a small little studio. And like my cousins and I would come over there and my sister, and we would all just like write and do music. And we still have that music to this day. I was really young at the time. So what I would do instead of being a part of the process, like I'd be there physically, but instead of making songs, I would watch their process. And I think that's what ultimately helped me be a better writer, because I just was always around it. Like that's what we did. Make music, write, and those are some good times. So
yeah, that's really interesting that you would have a family that would kind of be creative together. I'm sure it's common. I mean, I think my creativity was usually like a more isolated or lonely endeavor when I would be doing creative things as a young person, and I certainly did. But that's great. I love that story. What kind of neighborhood did you grow up in, and what were you into? You mentioned obviously sports and writing, but like, what was it like your community growing up? Did you move around at all?
Yeah, we lived in an apartment, which my uncle, he lived like above us. And so when that's why I was always over there making music and stuff. And why it was so ingrained in me is because we literally lived in the same building. And there were other people that lived in the building too. And we loved our neighbors. They were interesting people. I remember like it was kind of like a reality TV show. in the best way possible. But so we lived there for most of my life. And then we moved to the place where we live now, which is like, it's kind of like a duplex type thing. So we live on top. And then she's like a close family friend. She lived on the bottom. She's since moved out, but that was for years of our life too. So we've always lived in like comfortable places where we had people around us that were family, that were friends of the family, stuff like that. So a very diverse neighborhood. And yeah, I just remember growing up in neighborhoods. We played with other kids, but it was mostly I had a big group of cousins. So it was just mostly our family.
That's interesting. Yeah, you have this huge family and they all live near each other. I think that's interesting. That can be both good and bad, I suppose. But if it's especially if it's in a more urban setting, it's just so easy, or even a more densely populated, because you can go outside and see people and then go home. And it sounds like that's probably what it was like where you're growing up. Everybody's there close by. It's not like you got to get a ride to somebody's house or something like that. Like when I was growing up, we never saw our family except for like holidays, and we had to drive a long distance. So we weren't close with my cousins or anything. It was just such a different, obviously, experience. But what was high school like? And I think it's a fun question to ask someone who's only 21, because it was like just now almost. Although I suppose as a junior in college, I suppose it probably does feel like a long time ago, because you're just so overwhelmed with college and life. Yeah. But what was your high school? Where did you go to high school? What was that like? When did you know that you wanted to be who you are being
right now? Yeah. So to the first part of what you said, high school feels like, I tell my mom this sometimes, like it feels like just yesterday, because especially COVID, like I just remember senior year, it was like, oh, we're going on a break. And then I'm a junior in college now. So high school. So I went to Pius XI Catholic High School. It's in Milwaukee, but it's sort of in the Wauwatosa.
That's a former Catholic Pope, Pius XI, yes. Right? Like
Pius XI Catholic. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Huh. But I was just clearing that up for listeners. I only know that because a picture of him hangs on every wall in Sicily, where my wife's family is from. I didn't learn that growing up. But the point is, you went to a private Catholic high school?
Yes, okay. I went to a Catholic private school, and the really cool thing about Pius, and I've become such a big advocate of Pius. I feel like in high school, I was like, it's high school. You kind of hate it. You're a teenager. You know what I mean? But so Pius, the really cool thing about it, it's a Catholic school, but it was like a Catholic art school. And so that's a lot different than I feel like some of the other schools in our area, that there are a few like Catholic schools in our area that they were more like, and Pius was like that, but they were more chill. We had a college schedule, which was actually really fun. So some days I only had 2 classes. Some days I only had
high school.
Yeah.
Only as an upperclassman, I'm guessing, though. Like freshman?
Yeah, like anyone.
Right. That's what I was assuming. I was like, it must be to give the student as much control over their lives and responsibility, and then they have to kind of take it. I was assuming it must be what it's for. That's interesting. I've never heard of that for high school.
It was like I tell people that here, and they're like, no way.
Yeah.
Like, because most people have 8 periods a day where it's the same every day. But ours was a rotating schedule, and not to go on and on about Pius forever, but it was because it was an art school, you're required to take some kind of art for 2 years. So I did theater, which was really helpful. We also had a really great arts program. And then there was other things you can do, dance and stuff. Man,
you have done everything that a young person can do in generalities in terms of sports, theater, music, art, writing. I mean, it's, leadership stuff. It's obviously you're so well rounded. It probably offers you. I mean, I guess I'd ask what that has bred. It probably breeds that you kind of have a better idea of where you want to go and what you want to pursue to a certain extent. I'm making that assumption, but were you Catholic? How important was religion in that school? How important is it to you now?
Yeah. So the trajectory to get to Catholic schooling is actually really interesting. So I went to a public elementary school through the Milwaukee public system, of course. It was a good school back then. I went to Grand Tosa Drive School, and then things started to change, I guess, kind of the direction the school was going. So I switched schools and I went to a Lutheran school. So I was in a Lutheran middle school from 5th grade. They considered that middle school, 5th grade. So 5th grade to 8th grade, I went to a Lutheran middle school, which was St. Peter Emmanuel's Lutheran school. And then I met someone there my 8th grade year. He was a teacher. He was like, Hope, I feel like you'd really like Pius. And I was like, what's a Pius? I was like, what is Pius? And he was like, they have a great theater program. You seem like you really like it. You should go Shadow. So I went to Shadow, And the first day I was like, this is where I belong. So I ended up going to Catholic school for high school, of course. And then now I'm at Catholic school at Marquette. So I am not Catholic. We grew up Baptist, and then going through Lutheran school. I kind of have this weird relationship with religion now where I'm like, what am I? And my mom's like, just say you're a Christian and people won't ask questions. But I am still a Christian today. My faith is very, very important to me today. I'm still trying to find out like where I land in everything, and do I want to, convert to Catholicism down the line? Like what's the thing? Because I do like a lot of what Catholicism stands for, but then in some ways I think every religion you can critique in some way.
Well, let me just ask you about that, because I grew up Catholic and I got the confirmation thing. And I got a lot of jokes about it in my stand-up act because I'm very anti-Catholic now. I'm pretty much anti-organized religion. And I think that the best thing about religion, of course, is, faith. There's a lot of obvious great things about faith, but I think the best thing is community. And we already kind of talked about that. But you write about, and I'd imagine you consider yourself a feminist. You write a lot about feminism. And my biggest issue with the Catholic Church is that it's such a form of patriarchy, that the reason I wouldn't bring my daughters in to a Catholic church or indoctrinate them into it is because they could never rise to be a leader in that institution and everything that goes along with it that you know as much about as I do. So do you have any trouble squaring your feminism with what I'm describing is the patriarchy indoctrinated in to any form of Catholicism?
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant when I was like, there's a lot of critiques I could give about Catholicism. Yeah. That women not being able to be priests, or even like you said, rise to be a leader in the organization. I think some of their, the anti-LGBTQ plus like that stuff I don't love at all. And so I also have a thing against like organized religion, which is why it's so hard to know what to do, because my mom's like, well, you don't have to convert to anything. And she's really like, not like Catholicism. She's like, hope. She's like, I don't know if that's like for you, and I don't think it's for me either. I don't think I would do that. But to your point, yeah, I do have a thing against organized religions, because I think sometimes it's just like a way to exercise like power over people. And that's not really what I think religion should be about. And I think there's a way to still have a community of people that believe in God, that can even believe different things about God, and that still be a powerful thing. So a big thing of mine is I love to have interfaith like dialogue with like different people, because to me, I think every religion has something, but I believe every religion has something that's beautiful about it. And I think Catholicism definitely has some, like the Catholic social teachings we learned in school. I think those are great, but I think in some ways it's like some of their policies and things like that just like don't really match up to that. So yeah, I'm actually with you on that. I think, yeah.
I mean, as far as you're concerned, and like what it sounds like, what you're saying is that you're obviously you're still figuring it out. Maybe you spend your whole life figuring it out. But I always want to say to, like, in this case for you, and I certainly want to say to other people who are really overt or proselytizing, I'm like, maybe it's just personal. It can be yours. It can be whatever you want it to be, and whatever makes you feel however you want to feel about it, your relationship with God, your faith, or lack of any of it in this case. I mean, I've been researching and searching like Buddhism for the last 20 years, and I don't think I could call myself a Buddhist, but it's certainly a line. Like those teachings really are the ones that certainly help me feel better every day, but it's kind of, I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't go to the monastery or anything. I mean, I look like one of those guys. All I really need is the maroon robe. Let's look.
Maroon robe. Yeah, don't buy a maroon robe. But no, to your point though, that's exactly how I feel. I think where I'm at with religion right now is that it's mine. My relationship with God is independent of a specific religion or organized religion or like church. I think it's easier to just say I'm a Christian just based off if you're a Christian, it's like, belief in like Jesus Christ being the Son of God, but like, which I do believe, but I don't see myself anytime soon converting to any specific religion, but yeah.
I could talk about this stuff forever. We talk about so many different things. I want to ask you like one more question kind of about you, and then get to some of the work. And I really want to talk about like journalism with you and what it is and media in general and where you want to go for sure. But tell me a little bit about how you kind of got involved in why Marquette, why journalism. It's a really tough way to make a living. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy, and we're more divided and now than we were in my generation, certainly yours. I think it's probably fair to say with where we're at, but maybe you disagree. But why Marquette? Why journalism? I mean, you've been giving these really big deal scholarships. You're obviously someone that a lot of people believe in and show a lot of promise. But what's your reason for pursuing it?
Yeah. So to answer the first question about why Marquette, I never thought I was going to go to Marquette. I grew up playing club tennis, like at their facility at the Health Fair Center, which they are now like kind of taking down and reforming. But because like I was always around Marquette, and I never thought it was a place for people like me who are women of color, because I just never saw women of color kind of just like walking around, especially like Black women specifically. So being at Marquette is sort of like an interesting thing now, because again, I didn't think I'd be here. But so when I was thinking about school's senior year, someone told me about the EOP program, and that stands for the Educational Opportunity Program. It funds first generation college students, and it gives us like tuition to go here and a lot of like other services like tutoring, and we, just being able to not only get us here as first generation college students, but allow us to move through the institution and eventually graduate. So, and then they have graduate stuff too for EOP. So they can
let me just understand that, because it's a really important policy, I think, to break down generational wealth or privilege. Meaning, what it sounds like that is that if your parent did not go to college, you qualify as being someone who's a first generation. If your parent did go to college, it doesn't mean we all have more advantages, but you're likely to have had more advantages. If your parent's parent, if your grandparent went to college, it's even that much better. It's all tied up. I think people understand this in generational wealth and so on. But I can see somebody saying we need to do away with programs like that. Everybody's equal kind of bullshit. But I mean, I'm describing what that means accurately.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, you are. And some programs describe it differently. So sometimes for Marquette, I think it's if both of your parents didn't go to college, then you can, apply for the EOP program. It's very competitive. So it's like hard to get in, but you can apply for it. But other programs are like, if one of your parents went to college and the other didn't, you're still considered first generation. So most institutions kind of get to define like what that means and how much money you get. But to your point, generational wealth is like a really big thing. And I know people feel that same way about like affirmative action. Like, why should we have affirmative action at schools, especially maybe Ivy League schools and stuff? But what I would say to any of those questions is like, it is really important, because, my mom and my mom's mom, my mom's mom, like my family in general, like they didn't have those opportunities. And so it's harder to make a way, and for us through education, because we weren't allowed to have education or equal education. So that's a whole different conversation. But
well, let me just ask you that kind of the real personal question about this, because you and I talked about this a little bit. It's like you look at your resume and see everything that you've done at such a young age. And you kind of said, like, listen, there's a lot of pressure on me. I'm the first person to go to college. I take this opportunity really seriously. But then you also talked about like the kind of the guilt that could exist if you don't take this opportunity seriously, or even, which I thought was really interesting, I couldn't relate to, like the guilt of if you didn't succeed in as many ways as possible. Like if you failed, if you came up short, if you were one step back, you would feel almost kind of like a sense of guilt because maybe your other, family members didn't get that opportunity, or maybe you got to make the most of it. And it made me feel like a lot of empathy, but man, what pressure this person puts on herself because she's the first person to get this opportunity, and she feels like I better take advantage of it so fully that you've done so much at such a young age. I mean, that's how forgive me, but that's my psychoanalysis of basically what you said and what, you're kind of living with.
Yeah.
And you're not alone. I'm sure that's a very common thing.
Yeah. I think it's a common thing for first generation college students. So if there are any first generation college students listening to this, I try to just remind myself that, my family wants the best for me in whatever way that looks like. That doesn't have to look like a ton of money. That doesn't have to look like a nice fancy house or car. It's just being able to live life to the fullest. And so, given all the sacrifices my parents have made, and not just my parents, but my family themselves, like I have to take it seriously. I think that I've always been like, try to be a thoughtful person when it comes to stuff like that. But I think having that pressure and understanding now what it means to be a first generation college student, it's it's been a different experience, because I didn't even know going into college I was, until I applied for this program senior year. And I didn't know what that meant until like last year fully, when I was like getting more opportunities and I was starting to pick up on that. I was like, I'm starting to feel this pressure and I don't know where it's coming from. And then I talked to some of, my friends in the EOP program. They're like, I feel the same way too. And we talked, and I was like, understanding the source of where that pressure comes from, I think is the first part of moving forward from it, kind of getting over it. Like you said, I know we had, a private conversation, but, the advice that you gave, like, it really did help, because it made me realize right now I'm feeling that pressure, but I do think one day I'll be able to like move past that, not even that pressure, but that guilt.
Yeah.
Because again, my family just wants the best for me and wants me to have a career that I love, which kind of goes into why journalism.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I'm sure money matters for everybody. I mean, obviously you have to have a certain amount so that you're not miserable and worrying about if you're going to be able to pay your bills and all of that. I mean, it's horrible. But at the same time, journalism is not a place where most people would say, hey, you're going to, have a secure financial livelihood here. I mean, I've been through pretty much almost every job you can imagine in media outside of like an old school journalist doing investigative work. I mean, I understand the salary scales. I understand the lack of financial security. I understand that there's very few newspapers left. I understand consolidation of media. And I know that you do as well. And so yet you are still pursuing a career in this, which I think is even more noble than it certainly would have been generations ago, much less for young Black women, where I like to think there's more opportunities, but still not as many as there is for others. So why journalism? Yeah, you were about to answer it, but I just wanted to give that some color.
No, yeah. And that's true. So I had this random thought one day. I was like looking through majors, and I'm like, all my friends, they kind of have what they're going for, what they wanted to do. And I didn't have that. And so I was looking through and I couldn't find anything that I really liked. And then I was randomly like walking out the door of my grandma's house, and the word journalism popped into my head. Okay, this story's about to sound insane, but just be with me for the ride.
We're here.
So I had never heard of the like really of the word journalism. So when it popped into my head, I hadn't read that. Like I was still in like the A category of like looking through majors and stuff. And so I was like, God, is that you? So I was taking the trash out when I was walking out her door. So I remember I just like ran to take the trash out, and I was like, I got to sit down and I got to figure out what this is. And so I look up journalism, just a basic definition, and it's like news gathering, and sort of just like the publishing of like information and stuff like that. And I was like, wait, that kind of sounds like me. So when I chose journalism, it was sort of on this, it was sort of just like a step of faith, almost like just stepping out in faith of like, if it came into my head for this random reason and I didn't even know what it was, I'm going to do it and just see what it's like. But I fell in love with it my first year. And so why journalism then? I feel like it was just sort of this thought that like came to me that felt kind of spiritual maybe, but journalism now to me is the opportunity to uplift voices that, number one, we maybe haven't done historically. It's also the opportunity to, I think it's a really important thing to democracy as well, sure, especially in the climate that we're in. And so having people like myself who I try to be ethical, I try to, really dedicate myself to the idea that the people have the right to know. I think having journalists like that makes it worth it. We all need news. We all need information. Right now I'm working at the Community, which is the largest newsletter that is sent to Wisconsin prisons. And everyone's like, that's such a, interesting thing to do. But I'm like, I genuinely believe in that everyone has a right to know. Everyone has a right to information. And so all of that to say that I believe in the power of journalism. I believe in the good of journalism. I think journalism has historically done harm. I think it still can do harm, still has done harm, but I'm really dedicated to trying to correct that narrative, change the narrative in that way. So yeah, I love journalism. I love talking to people. I
learned through my research that newsletter or source existed, that it's a news source for people who are incarcerated.
Yes.
That's a really interesting initiative, endeavor that it exists, that there's any demand for it, which I think is awesome. And I couldn't be more ignorant on the idea, but that you work in it. I mean, I'd love to explore that at some point more, just in general, but it's a fascinating kind of place. Certainly even for a young person to be. I mean, most of us don't know somebody who is incarcerated, and so therefore don't care about them. And if you tell me about someone who's incarcerated, I still don't care because they probably committed a crime, and I'm done thinking about them. I actually think I just encapsulated most people's views on human beings who are, locked up in cages.
And I think, so I just started working here, or working for the community, and I remember thinking like, oh my God, people are going to judge me so hard because they're going to be like, Hope, why do you think like, but then I had to realize too that when we talk about like the prison system, and especially the Wisconsin prison system and the Milwaukee prison system, there are a lot of people that, a lot of them commit a crime, but I feel like sometimes it's less about whether they're guilty or innocent and more about the journalistic duty that everyone has a right to know. So what the community does for listeners out there, and just like for you as well, they collect a lot of information about the state of people's incarceration. So say there's like a new law that changed. That's something that will go in the newsletter that month, and they're able to, inquire about that, read about it, and figure out if it applies to them or not. So I think stuff like that is really beneficial for people, especially because prison systems kind of historically have done not so great when it comes to communities of color, especially in Wisconsin and Milwaukee.
Do you want to take another shot at that? And because it's quite understated.
Yeah, I'm like
let me do it. Michelle Alexander's, let me white-splain it. Michelle Alexander, through a black woman's book. Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow depicts, to anybody who doesn't know, which is most people, how absolutely horrific an entire generation of incarceration, mostly due to a war on drugs, which is mostly due to a war on black bodies and communities, has done to an entire generation of Americans. And if you look at the statistics of, how many people are locked up, it is so inhuman and so wrong and such a human rights violation and terribly disgusting and obviously super racist what it has done, destroyed communities of color. I felt like what you said was understated. I needed to take
it was. I was like, it's so hard because you summarized that beautifully, honestly, because it's a really complex issue that it's so hard to know how much information, because to get the full idea of, what that really looks like, especially again in Wisconsin or in Milwaukee that has one of the highest incarceration rates in the country. You have it's almost like you have to give all that information, but you did it perfectly. That's
well, let me just read from her, Michelle Alexander, the website. It's about her book. Michelle Alexander puts the entire criminal justice system on trial, exposing racial discrimination from lawmaking to policing to the denial of voting rights to ex-prisoners. And I mean, I just feel like she covers from arrest to the system to incarceration itself. I mean, it's just and also there's this book that I read last semester for my class. It's called Push Out, the Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools. And it's by Monique Harris. And what Monique
she talks
Morris.
Monique Morris. There we go.
I just Googled it. Sorry, I wasn't I've never heard of it, but I will try to get her on.
Shout out to Monique Morris. That's what I meant. I got the names mixed up.
Okay.
But yeah, so the book is really interesting because it talks about, sort of loosely related to our conversation right now. It talks about how the factors that go into someone's state of incarceration. There's so many factors, and schools often play a really major part in that, in the role of people being incarcerated. So all of that to say that I really tried to dedicate myself to the people's right to know. And I also think journalism is unique because you're sort of in the community, but outside of it because you're reporting on it. So what I have strived to do and the opportunities that I take on is to be in the community and not shy away from things that maybe people feel like, that's controversial or, maybe not that group of people. Why not that group of people? Again, I'm not advocating for everyone who's incarcerated because I'm sure, again, a lot of crimes are a crime is a crime is a crime. But again, when we talk about the complex history of mass incarceration, topics like the ones that we just talked about are really important to have a part of the conversation versus just being everyone's guilty. Because even if that's true, there's a complex history behind it.
I would argue that if what you said is everybody has the right to know, I would argue that regardless of the guilt of the crime, the responsibility of it, or even the horror of it, that person still has a right to know about any number of things. I think that's
Yeah.
I think that's, as you said earlier, an important tenet in democracy. I'm certain some people would debate that mass rapists or murderers or something like that don't deserve to read the news. I disagree.
Right. That's my point. Is like, I am not a lawyer. I'm not here to argue anyone's guilt or innocence. But when it comes to, I think it's very hard to say, if you're a journalist, the people have a right to know, and then you're excluding.
Well said.
The people from that.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to say. I mean, I just think human rights is a thing that we can all believe in or not. And even if you disagree with, or if you're okay with locking people up, are you okay with putting them in isolated confinement, which is a violation of human rights, because it clearly makes people go mentally, mad. I mean, it's been proven over and over. So, a lot to talk about there, and I'm certainly interested in talking about that issue. But getting back to the idea of journalism, I mean, how do you see it seems like a lot of your work at The Wire, Marquette's news organization, has been columns. You've written really wonderful, brilliant columns on a wide range of issues. I highly recommend people go read your stuff, because anybody would be surprised to find out that you're a young student, because it seems like veteran work. It really does. I read columns for a living, all day, every day. And I really love your work, and even want you to read from one of your pieces that you wrote that was, I think, personal. But I mean, how do you look at the job that you might be doing? You're not just going to go, or maybe you will. You're pretty good, pretty impressive. Get a job as a columnist where you get paid to write these types of columns that you're writing there. But where do you see kind of yourself going?
And journalism in general. So that was my mom's concern at first. She was like, "Oh, but you're doing all these columns. Like, are you going to be able to find like a job like in journalism? Because, what if they don't like your opinions?" And I told her, I was like, any place that like really, really would disagree with some of the major things I talked about, which again is just like, equal rights or Black rights and stuff that affects the Black community. If they disagree with that, then I'm not sure that's a place I would like to work anyways. You don't have to agree with all of my opinions. I'm okay with that, but there's a human rights aspect to what I write. And so if you disagree with like threads of that, I think that's not a place I would work. But to that point, right now I am in like the editor of diversity and inclusion. And so one day my ultimate goal is to be an editor somewhere. That would be really, really cool. But after school, I think I'll probably maybe go into some general news reporting. I'm okay with that. Maybe if I can get something else, I would love to do that. But I think I have some, from being an editor at The Wire, I think I have some of that, like, I get some of that news experience without necessarily being on the front lines of like reporting all the time. So yeah, I think maybe being a news reporter, ultimate goal to be an editor. I really want to do solutions journalism too, though. And again, I think that's a lot of what I've been doing in some aspects, criminal justice type stuff. I really want to do at some point. So I'm still kind of figuring that out. I'm a junior, so I need to, maybe get on that soon. But,
I think you're more than ahead of folks your age. Not that it's a race or a competition, but things, just so much can change in such a short period of time, and having an elusive idea of what you want to do and where you want to go, and you have a stronger than that. I'll stop giving you advice, but I think you're doing just fine is what I'm trying to say. Let me ask you just about, how you see the state of the world. You're a 21-year-old junior. You're a Black woman. You wrote a lot about your own identity, and I want you to read from that. I actually want you to read from that. It's so beautiful, and I want to hear you read it rather than me read it. But I mean, how do you see kind of, I mean, you can take this however you want, this question, but how do you see the way the world is, the world as a whole, the United States of America, being a Black woman? You can answer it, but really, I guess specifically, I'm doing this to hear from people your age more than anything else. But how do you see the world and America at 21?
Yeah. So I wrote in 2020, I wrote a column. I don't know if you read it, but it was called A Letter to America. And in that letter, I sort of outlined this idea that, for me at least, being a Black woman, being a Black person, that we're more animal than human. I think I put in there that we're more human than hero. And so I think my identity in the world has been shaped by how people obviously see me. And so I'm starting to get out of that. I'm starting to branch out of it just a little bit more and start in the sense of like not feeling as, recognizing my own humanity, not looking for people to do that for me or the world to do that for me, to be able to validate myself that way. But so I think the state of our world is, we're in an interesting place right now. I know we were like maybe last year, I think, or either 2022 or 2021, don't quote me, but I think we're like, named like a backsliding democracy. And so I think that's sort of the state of our world right now. Everyone has kind of distrust in news. Not everyone, but some people have distrust in news and distrust in politicians and our government. And I think we're right to be curious and critical, but I do think that worries me some. But what I will say is being a Gen Zer in your Gen Zeries, no, seriously, no, seriously, being a Gen Z person and anyone who, comes behind us, especially like, it gives me hope because I feel like we are really trying to turn things around when it comes to climate change, when it comes to, even for me, like how I'm trying to really dedicate myself to this idea that the people have a right to know. I know a lot of the students that I go to school with in journalism school, they also feel similarly to that. And so that gives me hope that it won't always be like this. And although it's always sort of been like this, it's a hard question to answer.
No, it's a hard question, but it's a great answer because it's complicated as F. I mean, it really is. Even what you said, I think I want to try to articulate what I think I heard you say, which I think is very interesting. But it's like your identity, and you write about this as a Black woman. It's so important. It is the core of who you are, and all that comes with that. And the pride that should come with it and the history that should come with it and those whose shoulders you stand on type of stuff. But the flip side or the other side of it is don't look at me as a Black woman world job unless it's what I bring to the table in good ways. But like, don't let that be a setback, which it can be. And there's so many ways and examples that we could point out about culture and life as a Black woman in America. So it's like, it's kind of what I heard you say is I celebrate my identity, and yet I don't want it to also hold me back or be seen as a disadvantage or something. Is that what you were kind of saying?
Yeah, that's what it's like. It's obviously such an important part of my identity because I'm very physically like a Black woman. But I think the connotations that are put on Black women, especially, obviously the negative ones, it's like I too have dreams. I too am just a person living just as I didn't ask to be born Black. Like no one asked to be born any way that they were. And so I think it's a weird place to be in America, or just for me, at least being a Black woman, because it's like the work that I do is so important that I self-identify with that. Obviously, like I look like that, but I need to internally self-identify with that, but also not take it to heart, some of the things that are being said, or else I'll hold myself back because I'll see like, or I won't hold myself back, but like the stereotypes and stuff like that.
Oh, you're making me think of something that you said earlier to maybe help illustrate your point, because you already mentioned this. Is this what you're saying is that, I think I've got it, maybe. You said earlier when you were playing tennis at Marquette, you didn't see Black women there, and so you couldn't see yourself there. And you don't want something you to be held back at an opportunity because you don't see any Black women doing that job or in that store or at that resort or in that industry or driving that car. Like, don't hold me back because I don't see other people who look like me in that space. Even tennis, I suppose, although, you grew up when Venus and Serena were the greatest, so that's a little bit different, but they certainly didn't.
Yes. So yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. I think there's just like a level of being like, when you're a Black woman in America, I think there's just a level of self validation you have to be able to give. And it's hard. Like, it's tough. It's a lifelong journey for sure. But I think I've been able to do all the things I've done at the heights I've been able to do it at because I've been able to just validate myself and say, you're important and your dreams are important and your life is important.
I want to ask you one more question, then I'd love for you to read just a little bit of this piece. Yeah. But in this piece that I'm asking you to read maybe the first third of, I mean, honestly, I'd let you read the whole thing if you want to, but you write in this piece, growing up, I was called the white Black girl. Mm-hmm. Although you will not find this in your standard dictionary, the implication is that I was not Black in the way the world desired me to be. I received this comment from white and Black individuals even more today, especially attending a predominantly white university like Marquette. I wanted to ask you to tell me a little bit about that, and maybe specifically, if you're comfortable with, like, when that's happened and how that's felt, because it's got to be just wreckage to have someone say that, Black especially, much less white.
Yes, I think, I was actually on a podcast like a week ago, sort of talking about.
I did not realize who I was dealing with.
You're dealing with a celebrity here. Like, I know I'm joking. But no, when we were talking about that on the podcast, and it's interesting because you expect it almost as a Black person from white people to be, to kind of look at you as like the palatable Black person to talk to have in there, working for them, to be in photos, like whatever, but it actually hurts more for me coming from Black people, because it's just like, it's like by saying that I act white. And let me explain that for a second, in the sense of the way that I speak or the sport that I played. Like, tennis is a very predominantly white sport. Having examples like Serena and Venus definitely empowered me, but I never, not once in my career, except for the same school in high school, played against like Black people ever. Like, I played club tennis for years and didn't play against a single Black person or Black woman, or didn't see any of the even guys playing against Black men. Like, there was like nothing. And so to that point, I think having these things that we sort of societally attribute to white people, having those things and Black people being like, oh, you're so white, or you're such a white girl, Hope. It was very hurtful. And then I also don't think that Black people understand, like, when they say, oh, you speak so proper, you sound so white, that you're inferring that like Black people are the opposite of that, which is improper and almost like ignorant. And so it actually is just kind of reaffirming those stereotypes that we work so hard to not let hold us back. And so it's a disappointing thing, I think, in the Black community, but in the community in general, because I have gotten that in some ways from white people as well. They'll never say like, oh, you act like, no one ever says that. Black people say that. White people don't ever say that, but it's more like, oh, like, you're so articulate, Hope, or you're so well spoken. I didn't expect that. It's like you get those threads of like, I know exactly.
Or tennis, huh?
Yeah. No, but literally, like, that's how, like, whenever I know I'm white. No, whenever I say club tennis, people first assume that like I did not have like much money doing that. I was doing it on a scholarship, which was great, or in a program that, allowed people from the city to do that. But the point of that is like, it literally is like that. Like, they don't say it, but you don't have to. It's like, it's very much implied.
Right. So, it's a really complicated issue, and it's very specific. And I'm glad that you've been so open to talk about it. It's super enlightening to read and hear about it. And it's very specific in that, most people don't have to deal with that at all. I mean, white people never have to deal with that. And it's definitely a mind fuck to have your identity kind of questioned, because the bottom line is you're moving through space looking as you do, and only do people question it when you talk or when you do a thing, or I suppose wear a thing or something. But I mean, it's questioning. It's got to really be, even as intelligent and mature as you are, it's still got to be confusing to some extent, upsetting.
It's confusing because I feel like the next, I kind of forgot how I wrote it, but I think the next sentence or some of the next graphs kind of address that like, I don't like that idea of like Black white girl, because I share the same fears as most Black women do and the same dreams. And I literally look just like a Black woman. And so it was really confusing growing up, because I was told that I was like the white Black girl, but then I still faced the same consequences of being Black in America. And it's like, you would think as a community, as far as like Black community, we'd be able to, in some sense, connect over our shared kind of experiences. But I think, in which I have been able to, but I think, if I speak or even being in journalism, it's an interesting thing. And then attending a PWI, everyone's like, well, why not at HBCU? And, that's kind of a whole different topic. But yeah.
What is PWI? Predominantly white institution?
Yes, predominantly white institution. And then an HBCU is a historically Black college or university like Howard or Spelman or anything like that. You write
it so well. Do you mind if I just read that part? Because it's really, you really articulate it kind of perfectly about, when someone calls you the white Black girl, you write, typically when someone says this to me, I remain silent, which I thought was interesting. Not because I do not know what to say, but because it doesn't deserve a response. But for those who have unintentionally or intentionally diminished my blackness, consider this the response. I can dance around my room to Luke Combs and Taylor Swift, but make no mistake, I am a black woman. I share the fears of many black women around me, losing a child to gun violence, sex trafficking, or childbirth, not being lovable or worthy, worries that I am seen as strong before I am seen as soft, and my music taste does not change that. I really should have had you read that. That was inappropriate, but still, I thought it was so perfectly framed. The music that you listen to doesn't change the experience that you have had and that continue to have every moment, potentially.
Yes. And thank you for reading that. That was literally like, I remember I was writing and I was like, I'm pissed off. I don't even know. I was like, that was years of just being pissed off. But I was glad I wrote it in that way because I do remain silent when people say that. Maybe I'll give them like a but something just like that, maybe a little like smirk. But
I mean, we have to work on the jokes. I think the jokes are where it's going to be in that response. It's just like such a point of ignorance that you just maybe say the whitest possible thing you can. I don't know. Just go with it. I mean, it's such a preposterous thing to hear, but sorry to make light of it. But I mean,
no, it's one of those things that a lot of Black women, especially the ones that, I'm friends with, they experience the same things. And even Black men too. That's what I was on a podcast with. It was only me being the Black woman and then 3 other Black men. And we all talked about it. And we all had that similar experience and different in some ways. But no, it's true. I mean, it doesn't deserve much of a response because it's always just so like, what does that even mean? But I wanted to address that. I was like, it's time that I address that.
I want to hear that podcast. I want to hear that conversation because to me, this piece is as enlightening. I've really not read much about that. I've had conversations about it and so on. But I think it's, for someone so young to teach me something, that I didn't know, given the fact that I read stuff all the time that I'm unfamiliar with. I really thought it was like award winning. I don't give away awards, but it's so well written and really very, very enlightening. And the way that you frame it, and it's short, but it's just powerful. Would you mind reading that first 2 paragraphs?
Yes. All right. With skin that resembles coffee, the nighttime sky, and tells the story of generations of women in my family, I am a Black woman. The smell of Red Door by Elizabeth Arden bounces off my skin as it once did my mom when she was my age, and I feel grounded in my Blackness and womanhood. Outside of school, I've studied Black history and all its tragedies and triumphs, and spoken the language of many of my ancestors. But even before I am Black and a woman, I am hope. On Sunday mornings, I dance around my room to country music, waiting for the sound of my toaster waffles to be done. And gracefully, I glide from one room to the other without a care in the world that my interest in music may be unconventional.
Folks should read the rest of it. It's just so good. I mentioned some of it. And read everything that you're writing. Read everything that Hope is writing at Marquette Wire. And then if anybody wants to hire her, I think we've proven how valuable she is. And she's a junior right now. So reach out. And I'm sure a lot of people who listen to this will. I hope they will. And I'll wrap it here, but I hope that we can continue this conversation. And I just can't thank you enough for joining me here. And I'll be forever in your debt for the name of this series, Jen Zeries, which you will be.
It's a good name.
Which you will be hiring a lawyer to copy my.
It's okay. That's my gift. That's my gift to you.
Thank you very much. It's on the record, folks.
But seriously, though, thank you for having me on the show. Someone please hire me, but I appreciate it. For sure.
Thank you very much, Hope.
No problem.
All right. Well, what did you think of young Hope Moses Jr. at Marquette University? Her future is bright. I really enjoyed that conversation. I am thoroughly enjoying this whole concept and series idea. Please send me your young people if you'd like me to talk to them, if you think that they're passionate, articulate, if they're doing really good things with their life, and we could see it through their eyes. We'd love to consider talking to them. Send them my way. standupwithpete@gmail.com, and I'll forward those on to Odessa. We'll talk about it and maybe reach out to that person. So please consider it if you know any young people that are Gen Z. And go follow and connect with Hope. Let her know that you heard her here on the show, and connect with her on LinkedIn and other social networks, all of which will be included in the show notes for this episode. Thanks to Hope. Thanks, of course, as always, to John Carroll, even though Pico didn't do an intro on this show because it's outside the normal show. I still thank him. because he was going to do one. We'll be back with the regular format tomorrow. I've got David Frum scheduled to join me. Matty Carlson, longtime listener, has started his own project. He's going to join me. He's also a resident of Lansing, Michigan, so we'll talk about the tragedy there and much, much more on tomorrow's show. At least that's the plan today. Thanks so much for your support. Can't do it without you. If you haven't signed up for a paid subscription, what are you waiting for? Go to patreon.com/standup right now and get it done. Okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Don't forget to send your vitamin N. It's been beautiful out there, at least in the Northeast. Always send me that. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, bye-bye.
Stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and hear